and welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm your host, Justine Reichman. With me today is Marshall Bartlett. He is the co-founder and CEO of Home Place Pastures. Welcome, Marshall.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you here to learn more about what you're doing and the impact you're having on food and agriculture. So if you would, for those that are not familiar with Home Place Pastures, can you introduce yourself and what it is you do at Home Place Pastures?
Yeah, I'd love to. So my name is Marshall Bartlett, as you mentioned, and I'm in Como, Mississippi, which is in northwest Mississippi. It's a really small town that not a lot of folks have been to, unfortunately. But I'm a fifth generation farmer here on my family farm. So we've been doing this for a living for 5 generations, and I moved home almost exactly 10 years ago to found Home Place Pastures, which is a vertically integrated regenerative farm producing grass-fed beef and pastured pork. So a lot of buzzwords in there, but basically we raise high quality protein and try to make it as available as possible to our community in our region.
Thank you. Thank you, Marshall. So I do want to talk about those buzzwords and maybe just take a minute to break them down, right? We had regenerative, we had a few different things. So if you could you walk us through those words and what they mean to you?
Yeah, well, buckle up because here we go. But now I'll try to make it mercifully brief. But regenerative agriculture is, kind of come along recently as a new buzzword for describing really a style of agriculture that focuses on soil health. So there's a lot of other things that go into it, but sustainability was the big word when I started about a decade ago. And I feel like sort of the innovators in the space didn't think that word encapsulated what we were doing well enough, because sustaining kind of has this static connotation, right? That things are not getting better or getting worse. They're just sort of staying the same. Whereas regenerative, when we really start to wake up the cycles of nature and focus on soil health through managing different species of animals on a farm and moving them around a lot, we really start to do things with that ecosystem and our soils that are pretty amazing. And we actually build soil health over time. So things are getting better. So regenerative farming is just, in my mind, it involves animal production. Now, some may disagree with that, but you're basically producing livestock on grasslands in a way that enhances the soil by using natural systems and kind of an ecosystem approach to that. So we can get in the weeds with that, so to speak, if you want. Vertically integrated is another buzzword that is equally fascinating. But there's not a lot of people that are producing food or farmers that are growing food that have sort of access directly to the end market or the end consumer. And in the meat world, that involves basically converting your agricultural practices via your livestock into marketable products like ground beef and steaks, right? People don't want to come out to your farm and buy a cow. They want to buy something they can take and eat. So there's there's a lot that has to happen between the cow and the steak, right? And in the meat world, that is basically a federally inspected processing facility. So we're one of the only farms in the country that raises and finishes livestock for harvest, that also runs its own USDA inspected slaughter and processing facility in the middle of the farm, which is where I'm sitting. So we have our own plant, which probably created as many problems or more problems than it solved, but we are very proud to be, in direct control of each one of those processes. And from this little meat plant here in our farm, we distribute throughout our entire region to both, food service and like restaurant customers, and ship directly to people's households. And we run a little restaurant and butcher shop here on the farm as well, which is
wow. Mm-hmm. So much to dig into, but I do want to just start with, if we go back to the beginning, right? What was your farm like as you were growing up versus how it is today? I mean, I'm sure over these 5 generations, we've seen things progress as opposed to stay stagnant, right? And you've integrated into these the new lessons we're learning, the new ways to do things that are more progressive, innovative. Notice I stayed a word from the word sustainable, because sustaining means staying the same, right? So as a result, so I'm wondering, what does that journey look like?
Yeah, well, I obviously didn't have the pleasure of witnessing for, I guess, 3 of those generations, but I can definitely speak to the way that kind of commodity industrial agriculture shifted during my dad's career, his 45-year career, and why I didn't want to farm for a while, and what ultimately kind of brought me back. So I think for a lot of listeners, understanding the way that agriculture, like 99% of agriculture and food production works in this country, is pretty foreign to them. And I can just give like a brief background of how that worked here on our commodity row crop farm, and then maybe talk about what was so determined to deviate from that, right? So I grew up here on the farm farming, loved the land, but the practices were something that I think my father, especially me and my siblings, became kind of increasingly disenchanted with. But we would basically, my dad would go to the bank every January, February, loan season, as we called it. And he would ask, basically borrow money against our land as our asset to make his crop. And so most farmers in the South that are involved in row crop farming are asset rich because they have land and equipment, but they're cash poor. You can't come up with any money ever, So it's a very interesting way to live. But the land is a huge privilege and asset, but you're constantly having to leverage it to keep going. So he would borrow money against the land. That's what you call a production loan. And with that money, you would purchase your seed, all the, which is often patented, like GMO seed, especially, starting in the late 90s through my entire childhood. Then you would have to buy all your synthetic fertilizers, your herbicides, and your insecticides. And we would plant cotton, corn, soybeans, commodity row crops, very input intensive. Dad would use that loan to pay for those inputs, pay his labor. You have to deal with the weather throughout the entire production season, which you have no control over. You also have no control over the cost of those inputs. They're being dictated by large chemical ag companies that aren't really interested in your well-being as much as they are their bottom line. And then when you harvest the crop in the fall, if the weather has gone well and you've made some type of yield, the value of that commodity is dictated by the Board of Trade in Chicago. You have no price setting or autonomy in that way at all. It's just a commodity. It's homogenous with every other bit of that crop in the country. And so you can start to kind of get a picture of, no matter how hardworking or talented or dedicated to producing this crop, you're really using a playbook that's not yours. You're being handed the rules by other people, and you have no control over any part of the process. And then when you sell the crop, you just, hope to hell you can go pay the bank back and have a little bit left over, because in a couple months you got to go re-up. And if you lose money, you have to go to the bank and borrow money again to try to make it again the next year. So it's this vicious cycle. And that really changed a lot during my dad's career with the advent. My dad started farming when he was about 20. He took over our farm. He grew up on the farm, but in the early 60s, he's born in 1942. So a lot of these synthetic inputs and commercial fertilizers were developed during World War II. After that, things really became focused on those synthetic inputs. Then the GMO stuff came around in the mid to late 90s, and everything kind of shifted over to those seeds. So very chemical intensive, and you became so hooked on that you couldn't keep your own seed. You had to buy these patented seeds. So Dad just saw that thing that I just laid out become even more intense over time. So he pushed us all away from farming. And when I say we, I mean my two older siblings and I, and worked really hard to get us off the farm and to give us opportunities to do literally anything else. So we were smart and fairly, focused in school, and we got the opportunity to go to good schools. I ended up at Dartmouth College in New England. So straight off the farm to an Ivy League school. It's a pretty wild journey, but basically had the opportunity to get, as far away from Mississippi and the farm and this occupation as one could get. But here I am raising pigs and coming.
So what brought you back? What brought you back a decade later?
That's a great question. So I think, the situation that I just laid out was one that I was not very interested in becoming a part of. Right. So I thought that was farming. I thought that if you were going to, try to make a living, if I was going to come back to this place and farm this place and try to provide for a family, that was what I had to do. And so I wasn't going to farm. But when you grow up like this on a place like this, it's been in, your family for so long, it's kind of this like weight that pulls you back, and it kind of had its hooks in me, and I loved it. And I didn't want to contribute to the brain drain in Mississippi, where people that, can get educated and leave this part of the country. And I didn't want this tradition to fall by the wayside, but I wasn't going to move back and row crop farm. So in high school, college, I was really influenced by a lot of people in the local food movement, a lot of the sustainability at that time practices that were happening, a lot of kind of innovators in this space that were grappling with the same problem, thinking, how can we keep these farms producing food but not feed into this problem of the commodity industry, which is not just a financial problem that I laid out to you, but there's horrible externalities to the soil, to the watershed, and to the air when you farm that way, that input intensive way, right? So Joel Salatin, Will Harris, I don't know, the guys that your listeners may be familiar with, had a big impact on me. And I did, an internship at a farm where a lot of people were thinking about this. And ultimately I worked for a company in New Orleans that was selling meat to chefs. And it was just local. There wasn't really anything else to it, but it just really struck me that there seemed to be, like, I was a 22-year-old kid at that point, and I could walk into like an Emerald's Steakhouse or a John Betch or a Donald Link restaurant and get an item on their menu, and pretty easily, I was just walking into the kitchen and like having a conversation with the chef. And, so I kind of sense and through a lot of the things that I read and kind of the early, parts of this movement, that there was this demand out there, right? Chefs, eaters, people that cared about where their food came from. Everyone was getting more and more educated and focused on like eating better and good ingredients, right? Having something they trusted and could connect to that they felt like was intrinsically good. And that's what they wanted to support. And then there were all these farmers that were dealing with all the stuff I just talked about, and they were sick of it, and they wanted to have another opportunity or a way to continue farming that didn't feed into that commodity ag system, right? Some kind of way to do something locally where they got a higher share of the consumer dollar than what the industry was giving them. And so you had this supply and this demand. And in the middle of it, you have a tremendous amount of pain and woe and problems and complications. But in that lies the opportunity, right? And that's like kind of where an entrepreneur loves to get in there and figure it out. And I will say I wasn't just like purely entrepreneurial. I was trying to find a way to make the family farm thing work, and so I was trying to build a business plan around that instead of doing this because I saw it as a purely, no entrepreneur would have touched this with a 10-foot pole. This was very much like I have a mission to do this, and I'm determined to try to make it work, financially. So to connect the
So how did that? Oh, sorry.
Oh, just to connect.
No, I just
to connect the supply and the demand. The big thing, to connect those two things is the meat plant, right? To convert the livestock into sellable products, and that's a real brick wall for a lot of people trying to scale this in the meat world. So I, at the tender age of 24, thought I would solve that problem and build my own plant in the middle of my farm. And again, we did that, which I'm really proud of. But I was very naive as to what I was getting into, and it's been super challenging. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I really was curious, as I know that this was your father took this over from his father, and you are now back there, and he had sent you off to go do anything else. What was his response when you came back and you're like, okay, I want to do it this way, and I want to be able to continue in this family, legacy?
I think that's probably a complicated question for him, but I definitely think that there was initially a lot of skepticism and maybe some disappointment. Like, hey, you sent me off to Dartmouth and now I'm like coming home and raising pigs. And he's like, man, we could have saved a lot of money if you just would have done this straight out of high school, But I also think that it's been sort of the thrill of a lifetime for both of my parents to see the kind of rejuvenation that's happening here, and what my business and Home Place Pastures, and my siblings are involved as well. They're kind of minority partners, so I don't want to I want to be sure and mention that they don't live here, but they're super excited about this and supportive, and that we've been able to build this plant. We now have a restaurant, a butcher shop on the farm. We've like cleaned up the whole place, and like we greet customers here, and it's just been thrilling for them to see this next generation come in and try to do something that's a little bit more, has a bigger community impact, right? It's not so isolating, like you're on the farm in the middle of nowhere. We're bringing people in. It's exciting. We get opportunities like this. We have groups and tours at the farm, and my parents have a restaurant in their backyard now, which they take advantage of a lot. So they love that. And, I also think that they worry about the financial viability because we've obviously had to take a ton of chances. And farmers are not scared of debt. I mean, it's what we live by. But instead of doing it every year like Dad would do, I've just done a hell of a lot of it like all at one time. So that they're concerned about. But ultimately, it's been really gratifying to me to see both my parents kind of come around to this and really take a lot of pride and joy in what we're doing here on the family farm.
And so I think that's so nice. I mean, especially because they get to witness it and participate in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and see how things evolve. And you're continuing to move this tradition forward. It might change with the times, with the needs, but you're maintaining it still not all the same,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, you just had a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm wondering what your vision is for that in your business.
Yeah. So my
And
daughter.
because there's so many generations to this,
Yeah.
is that something you have a hope for or a desire to see?
Very much so. I think that a lot of generational farmers struggle with like this. You don't want to push this on your kids, right? And I mean, my daughter, my first child is 14 months old, so I don't have a tremendous amount of experience parenting, just to put that out there. But as she gets older, I think I'll sort of have the approach that my parents have, where it's like you're obviously very involved in the farm. You're spending a lot of time down here, and you're expected to chip in and help out, but you're not expected to like take the reins if this is not something that you want to do. So I hope that my daughter and any future kids that my wife and I have will have the opportunity to grow up here and love the place and enjoy it. Like, I mean, it was paradise. I love to hunt and fish, and I just had, the keys to the kingdom here. So I hope that will mean a lot to them and connecting with their roots in Mississippi, in this North Mississippi community. It's not just the farm; it's also the literary history, the musical history, and some of the not so good parts of our history that I think forms this kind of complexity of growing up in the rural South that is really formative for people and creates a lot of great thinkers and writers. But anyway, I want them to be involved, but I don't want Joni to be. That's my daughter, to be destined to take over the slaughterhouse. I want them to be able to engage with it as much as they can. But the key is that we have built a viable business enterprise that is here for them and that is here. And we haven't just let things decay and disappear. Right. And that's really important to me. So I want to give them the option and a way to stay on the farm and keep this going, but not, you know, require them to do so, I guess.
And everybody wants their children to be able to follow their
Yeah.
passions, right? But also, remain true to your core values, integrate tradition into it, but equally be their own person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all those things at once,
All those things. Yeah.
right? I mean, it's a tall order.
Yeah.
So when you came back and you started this new initiative, if you will, and you did a little bit of a pivot for the farm, what were you most hopeful for?
To me, I was most hopeful on the connection piece, which is one of our, core values is to be able to connect people with their food, right? In these innovative ways. And it was so exciting to me to think about having a product that wasn't, field corn or BT cotton that's like every other, bit of that commodity produced in the country, but we could actually do something special that was rooted to these practices and these principles and also a sense of place because we love the farm. We love our community. I mean, Como's, I know I'm wearing the hometown hat here, but it's a really special place to us. So that to me was so exciting about the style of agriculture. It wasn't just the farming, but it was sort of the community and the connection aspect. And we could throw parties, music festivals, chef dinners, like really get these people. And we were good at that. We were good at throwing parties. Is one thing I'm good at. So that was really, really fun and got us fired up early on. And it's still a big part of what we do. But I think for a lot of people considering this type of venture out there, it's super challenging, and you don't need to have any stars in your eyes or idealism. I mean, it's just raw and gritty and risky and not very profitable and a tremendous amount of work and risk. But if you're doing it by connecting to a local consumer base of your community, at least you can build a brand and you have some way of kind of dictating your prices based on the value that you can demonstrate to your customer base. And that's very entrepreneurial and much more exciting than just growing corn and taking what the market gives you at the end of the year. So that was a really exciting way to integrate an entrepreneurial spirit and kind of a passion for those things with, also being able to farm for a living.
So, Marshall, when you were coming back to, sort of reinvent the wheel, so to speak, and bring some new blood or some new ideas to the farm, right? What was your hope in terms of connecting food with health and agriculture and the future of our planet?
Yeah, well, that's a hard one to encapsulate in a quick one, but I will do my best. I also want to
Okay.
emphasize I didn't.
You know what? Maybe let's think about it like
Uh-huh.
this. Let's think about it like this. If you were to bullet it out, what would be the top three things you were aiming to achieve
Okay,
within health, wellness, and the planet?
great. That just saved you about 45 minutes of me rambling, I feel like. So thank you. But
Well done,
yeah,
me.
let's go. So, and I also want to emphasize I didn't reinvent the wheel. I mean, I did bring all of this brand new business on the family farm, but there were a lot of really innovative, creative thinkers that came before me that kind of paved the road to try this type of enterprise, like some of the guys I mentioned earlier. But yeah, I think that our first goal was to farm in a way that made our farm a healthier place to live and to produce food from. So the soil health, the regenerative ag. So that's like step number one: improving our farm to where we can leave it better than we found it for future generations. So get rid of all the chemicals, all the synthetics. Figure out how we can use natural practices to augment soil health and therefore biodiversity, which also has a big impact on the downstream, the watershed and the air, which is shared by everyone. So that's one. I think two was how can we produce food in a way that is ethical and gives the animals that we're eating a way of life that isn't the very, very not good way of life that 99.9% of them have in our industrial food system. So that's the amazing thing about this type of farming is that you can do both of those things at the same time, right? Just by allowing the animals to exhibit their natural behaviors, you're using them to build healthier soils. So those are two big things. The third was the community investment part, where if I come home and build a viable enterprise here with a meat plant and restaurant, I'm managing like 300 acres, roughly, and I have 25 employees. My dad, when he was row crop farming, managed just shy of 2,000 acres with the land that we own, and he had to rent a lot of land to be able to make it financially feasible. Which, depending on what part of the country you're in, that may sound crazy, but you had to really grow a lot of acres to row crop farm, and he would only have 4 to 5 employees managing that many acres. So when you really think about bringing this whole process back to the farm, you create so much value, economic value, right? And just payroll, jobs. And we wanted to also, a big part of that rural economic development was not just the jobs we're creating directly through home place pastures, but we're giving farmers market access to a premium market to raise animals this way. So we're spreading our mission and we're adding revenue to small family farms in the region. And those were the main tenets of our mission. And it has been super hard and we haven't made any money, but damn it, we're doing all those things. So, I mean, we've succeeded in hitting the.
So what keeps you going? What keeps you going? What are you hopeful that people take away from this so that maybe you can make money and you can continue to do this and evolve and grow?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't really know what keeps me going, but I certainly hope I don't run out of it because I'm in a lot of trouble if I do. But I think that just being excited about the mission and knowing that this fundamental problem that I started with, right? 10 years ago, I had the idea about this fundamental problem, and it's the same today. And I've been fired up about that idea ever since. I've just basically gotten the shit kicked out of me attempting to connect the supply and the demand that we talked about, right? But that's where all the tough part is in between there, all the problems. And I think that the landscape has changed a lot over the last 10 years, but the problem remains that consumers, essentially when they shop for their meat, right, they are looking at, or any product, they're assessing it in just two ways, right? At the point of purchase, it's what does this look like? What does this product look like to me? Does it look appealing to me? And that could be in meat, that could be, how the packaging looks, how the meat looks, what the label claims are. And then what is the price, right? Those are the two things and we make those assessments in like nanoseconds, right? Because we're looking at this just like endless variety that's totally overwhelming and stimulating. And so we just grab stuff. And what the industry has found is that people are going to look at those two things and get the thing that looks the best to them that's the cheapest. And that works every time, right? And so the problem with that is that the industry has figured out how to sort of manipulate that and put label claims that are misleading. Like, for example, the big one that's gotten a lot of press recently, y'all may have talked about, is the product of the USA label claim, right? So when you go to the grocery store, Trader Joe's, whatever, a high-end grocery store, you see product of the product of the USDA organic, grass-fed, grass-finished beef. And you're like, damn, this is the good stuff. This is what I want. This has got everything I need, right? I've been reading all this. I've been listening to these podcasts. This is it. Here we go. I'm going to grab it. But then, so you buy it, and because it's cheaper than some local farm name on the pack of ground beef that says the same thing. And you're like, well, this claims to be a USDA organic product of the USA, and it's, $2 a pound cheaper than, home place pastures over here, whatever. And the issue with that is the reason that it's cheaper is because it's all coming from overseas. So there was a label claim change made, I think in 2015, where the industry was able to basically manipulate legislation and regulation to get the ability to put product of the USDA on something that was minimally reprocessed and repackaged in the States. So the animals are raised in Uruguay or Australia, where they don't feed animals corn. It's just not part of their industry. So they're mass produced, slaughtered in big slaughterhouses, cheaply, shipped in usually, refrigerated barge containers over here. And then people buy the box meat or the trim, and then they grind it and put it in 1 pound packs and sell it. And that's significantly cheaper than buying from domestic farmers. So this has created a situation where the grass-fed meat, and this is just beef, grass-fed meat, the industry for grass-fed beef in America has just exponentially increased over the last 15 years. But the market share of domestic producers has plummeted. And right now, 85% of the grass-fed, grass-finished beef says product of the USA that is available for market here in the States is from overseas. 85%.
Wow.
So this is something when you tell people this, they're like, that is nuts. That's crazy. I don't want to support that, right? So I feel like we're all just trying to we feel like the consumers are on our side. They're just getting so confused by all these label claims. And if we can all get together and just explain to them how vital and important and much better the meat is for them, if they support local or regional producers, then we're going to, really solve a lot of these problems with the food system. And I still think, despite how challenging and daunting all of this is, that there is a real, that's the mission, right? And that is vital. And, I'm going to make it work or die trying. So I think that's really what keeps us going.
So when you mentioned that your meat is local and it's here, and there's all these misconceptions about the labels on these other meats that are coming from overseas, what role does education play for you in your business so that you could communicate with the end consumers why this is important and, the impact it has for them as well as the planet by supporting your local farmers and buying locally, grass-fed, grass-finished, organic, etc.?
Yeah, I think that the education piece is so important. And what I have found and what I see in, my colleagues in the space is that we're so bound to the operation side of making all of this work that it is very hard to squeeze out a little bit of time to do things like this and to market and to get that messaging right. And often the people that are really talented at solving these problems and producing food don't necessarily have the same skill set that it takes to translate the stuff to consumers in a really concise, effective way, right? And that's a whole nother skill set. And that's really what we're embarking on now. And to us, the most impactful way to do that is to have people come here, right? You remember our kind of mission and our core values. We're rooted in this community. I'm sitting in the middle of a meat plant in the middle of home place pastures in Como, Mississippi right now, right? And it's where I spend 6 days a week. So when we get people out here and we literally walk them around and they're looking at our livestock and their shoes are on our pastures and they hear our story and meet us and talk to us, it is so transformative for me and and for those people that are willing to come out and spend the time to do that. And that creates this connection that you can't reproduce with a damn label claim in the grocery store aisle, right? So that is very, very powerful. And we want to like harness that. Now, unfortunately, it takes a ton of time and energy, and you do it about 10 to 15 people at a time instead of like 10 to 15,000 people at a time, which is what we need. But I think that educational aspect is critical. And then, of course, getting opportunities like this in any way we can sort of get some type of platform to tell this story and to explain to people in a more pleasant and natural kind of conversational setting all of these heady concepts and complexities to make them understand like this isn't just a purchasing decision. This has like huge and sweeping ramifications, and that, as consumers, we dictate the food system. Our choices are, you pull a lever that directly dictates how all of this works. And so we're just trying to get the word out, any way we can.
Of course. And I just want to go back to that whole USA meat thing. What is there anything you're doing to try to change the way that process is, so that people can have more clear communication and it can be more representative of what the meat is, right? Versus, so people will have the idea that they're getting meat from overseas.
Yeah.
Even though it's saying USA, it's not in the USA. So I'm curious, this is a big problem, and it's, a government issue, right? Or it's not a government, partly government, partly how it's all dealt with. And I'm wondering, what, if anything, you're doing about that and you hope to do about that?
That's a great question. And I should mention that actually, because of activism from local farms and really how egregious this particular label claim is, I mean, it's just so over the top that it finally nudged some change. And they've recently required that products bearing the product of the USA label claim only be applied to animals that were raised and harvested in the States. But this won't go into effect until 2026. So all the stuff.
Okay, so in the meantime, what does the end consumer do?
They can, buy from home place pasture. That's one solution.
They can buy from home.
No, they have to buy from people that they know, right? So depending on your region, I mean, you're in California, right?
Northern California, so Stemple Creek.
Yeah, the local food
all those
is in your area. So just buy from someone where you can ask them like, hey, you're not importing this stuff in like barges, are you? And there's a lot of brands. I will not name any names, but this space is so. I'm not the only person that sees opportunity in the challenges, right? So there's been a lot of smart folks that have started companies and had a tremendous amount of success because they're really good at their branding and their marketing. And they start running into supply chain problems, right? Like right off the bat, because inherently the stuff is difficult to scale because of the way it's produced. And there's this tremendous pressure to just import the damn beef. You're like, it's grass fed, it's organic, it's so cheap, and we can get as much of it. I can just get it in here tomorrow. Like, let's just do it, And a lot of them do that. I understand the pressure, but you're just becoming part of the problem at that point. So we are really, really hardcore about like telling that message, and like every bit of meat that we sell walks in this building on 4 legs, and we do not import any boxed meat. We do not bring any of that in. So I think, for consumers in the meantime, it's just never been more important because of these misleading claims and the complexities in this to just talk to the people that are making your food and get to know them. And that can be hard to do, but you just got to seek them out. They're out there. There's a lot of, us dirt farmers out here working our ass off to make this stuff available to you. And then you just got to find us,
Are there any hard-hitting statistics that you could share that talk to the impact of buying locally, buying organic, and, these regenerative areas versus buying from another country?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had more of these, just like I should have notes on my hand. But one that is particularly striking to me was from an economist named Ken Meter, who's done a lot of work on local food systems. And he was able to figure out that communities that were raising a lot of food and selling it into the commodity industry, and then that only had like big box stores that weren't sourced there, were had this like massive food deficit, where they were spending more on imported food than they were making on the stuff they were sending off. If they could somehow figure out how to close that loop, they would add a lot of value in communities. And he also found that if you spent $1 at a locally owned, food producing company or small business, that dollar circulated at an average of just over 3 times around that community, through, local jobs, supporting other local businesses. In our case, our producer program revenue going to other small family farms that are in our region. Whereas when you spend money at one of the big box, sometimes internationally headquartered large companies, your dollar only circulated in your community just over 1 time, like 1.2. And most of that was just the people working at the establishment that you source from. So it's a threefold the impact that your dollar has when you shop locally. And the impact of that is really hard to see as a consumer, because our pain point is like, how much money do I have and how much do I have to spend to do it? And unfortunately, the warm fuzzy of knowing it's going around the community, you don't get to see any of that happening, and it's sort of a long play. But that was really fascinating to me. One more thing I'll quote was some research done on, mentor of mine, Will Harris, who I mentioned earlier, his farm. He actually had a research group come out there and do sort of a lifetime study of producing his grass-fed beef, because he has multiple species. He has live-in forages year-round, and he's practicing rotational grazing, regenerative agriculture, composting, kind of a zero waste system. All these things combined, they actually found that, for every, basically the cows and the lifetime of that product was a net carbon sink. He was sequestering more carbon on his farm through his production practices than that product was emitting. And that's pretty revolutionary, because, that basically means that sourcing food from a regenerative farm is the only way you can basically become a net carbon sink through your food purchasing decisions. Because even if you're eating like meat replacement proteins, and I don't want to get into like, I don't have anything against vegan, it's all good. I know everyone's got the same goal, but the complexity in that argument is that a lot of those plant replacements are produced in monoculture environments, like what I grew up doing. It's just spray rigs going and fertilizing, spraying giant monocrop patches of peas and beans and whatever that plant protein is. Whereas, to really run a farm like an ecosystem, you have to look at the Great Plains, look at all these ecosystems we're trying to emulate. You have to have stack functions of life, including ruminants, right, to come and harvest the grass. So it's basically, your impact on the local community is vast, and your impact on the environment is massive, right? When you spend your money like this, animal welfare, all of that is baked in there too. But the only way you can really impact these things is to support a local regenerative farm. And if you're coming at it from an animal, welfare standpoint, that's important. If you're coming at it from an environmental standpoint, that's critical for the reasons I just explained. And if you're coming at it from a supporting local and small business standpoint, you've got these very clear indicators that show your dollar is really having a bigger impact in the community when you shop locally. And if everyone kind of gets on board with this, I think it can really transform our food system and our rural economies, and just make all of our communities a better place to live and eat. And, I believe that in my bones. So I hope that that's the future that we have in store.
So if your dad was participating in this conversation, the generation before you, and we were asking him about what he sees for the future of the farm and the direction you're going in, what do you think he'd say?
I think he'd be excited. I think he'd be like, son, I think you're crazy and you've taken a hell of a chance, but you're getting up and doing it every day. And I can't wait to see what comes of that, and all the arguments I've had with my dad, in the evening times over a glass of bourbon on the porch, which is how we like to mostly converse. The one thing we've never disagreed on is, the love of the land and the work ethic. And that's just kind of baked into what you do when you're involved in agriculture. And I think Dad has seen the amount of effort that's gone into all of this, and that's been really gratifying for him. And I think he thinks we're onto something, and he loves eating steaks at the restaurant. So we'll always have that.
Yeah, I mean, right? It's right in your backyard. I'd like to have that in my backyard. In the meantime, it sounds a lot like family plays a large role in farming, at least, within this conversation. Your brothers are even part of it. Can you talk to me a little bit about the meaning of family for you, family in farming, and creating a better for you solution?
Yeah, and I think the family farm is
And I wrote your daughter into that because now you're a father
yeah.
too,
And
right?
the family farm is a complex thing that has a big place in our like American collective cultural identity. I think is somewhere down the line we all had somebody that was involved in farming or wanted to farm or lost land or wanted land or had land, and had this farm, and it's really really challenging for most of those farms have disappeared, right, because of kind of macroeconomic pressures. And I think we're so fortunate because our parents were so supportive, and we had a happy childhood that my siblings and I have remained very close, and because of that we've been able to navigate all those challenges. And even though I'm the one back on the farm doing this, they're very supportive, and we have common shared interest for the family farm, and we want to try to leave it as intact as possible for our kids. And so that to us basically means trying to set up some kind of undivided interest where the land cannot be carved up and sold, because we somehow miraculously made it to the now sixth generation is coming up, and we want to preserve that. And so I think our interest in conservation and not letting this place go by the wayside is really, it's really challenging because siblings don't often agree, right, and they all have different agendas. But we've been very fortunate that we're close, we love each other, and we share a passion for the farm and keeping it for future generations. So I'm very grateful to my siblings for their support for everything I'm doing, and for sharing that vision with me.
And so if your daughter was listening to this podcast down the road, she's trying to figure out what to do, what might you say to her?
Gosh. I would say I hope that we're not in debtor's prison right now, Joni, and I hope you've got some means at this point in your life. But yeah, I would say you just gotta do what feels right and follow. I know that sounds so trite, but when you go in and when you're thinking about a career or what you want to do for the rest of your life, you got to do something that makes you somewhat excited, just and find a way to make it pay. But otherwise, you'll regret it. So even though I've done something that has been very unfruitful financially and very risky to date, I still have a tremendous amount of optimism, and I'm so grateful and find so much satisfaction in this path that I've taken. And I hope that my kids will find the same.
So for those interested in learning more about Home Place Pastures, where might they be able to go to get more information, to support the farm, to be able to buy locally in your area?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. Thank you. So if you're one of our neighbors here in the Southeast, you can obviously come to the farm. We have a farm store that we mentioned that's open Wednesday through Sunday, and we serve lunch from 11 to 3 every day, and you can buy our products there. We also do a steak dinner Friday night, which has become very popular. And we have a lot of cool events, chef dinners and concerts and stuff. So just, check us out, follow us on social media. If you're a little further afield, we have a website that we're constantly refining and making more user friendly. But on the website, we sell a subscription box, but you get to choose the frequency that you get it, and you get to customize it. So you get to choose the products that go in it to a certain extent. And then we have specialty add-ons that you can throw in there that are only available to our box members. So that's a really neat program, sort of an innovative thing we're trying to connect to the end consumer. Definitely check that out. And you can also buy whole and half and quarter animal shares from us on the website, but you got to pick those up at the farm. So there's kind of a variety of ways you can support us. And obviously we would really appreciate that. And join our email list, stay in touch, and please, contact me if you have any other questions or follow-up stuff from listening to this. And I just really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
Thanks, Marshall. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will throw all that information into our show notes as well, so that anybody listening can reach out, follow along, and learn more about how to get access to meat, whether by subscription or on a local level.
Thanks.
In the meantime, for those folks out there, if you like this episode, give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to download and subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you next week.